Alright, YouTube, it's time to talk about my predictions for what the next big battles in the Supreme Court or in our culture in general are likely to be. I think the gay marriage debate has begun actually, and some Christians understand this, others appear not to comprehend this fact. And other religious people too, and assorted people who oppose it, they appear to understand that the debate over gay marriage is beginning to wind down. I think it's fairly obvious the Supreme Court, at least on its second question that it's currently taking arguments on and considering, as far as whether gay marriages performed outside of a state where it's banned would have to be still considered valid by that state if the person chooses to move there. There appears to be no question that that will actually be a yes vote on the behalf of the Supreme Court. In fact, it may be a 9-0 decision because it's so cut and dry because of the repeal of DOMA. And if that's the case, the issue is basically over because, again, while these bans may be upheld, a person could simply go out of state, get the marriage, come back, and they'd still be legally married despite being gay. And then, of course, within the next 2 to 4 years, public opinion, I believe, will swing even more heavily in favor of gay marriage being tolerated, in which case even if they were to vote no on both and they were to say, yeah, it's okay for states to ban it, at this point, approval of gay marriage is high enough so that in almost none of the states where it's already allowed would it actually end up being banned again, unless the legislature wants to move against the will of the people, which would be political suicide down the road. And I don't think any of them would be willing to do so. And in the states where it is banned, in some of those, you would expect the bans to be overturned by voter referendum. So it has become a non-issue. But I'd like to talk about some of the other ideological fights that I can foresee on the horizon in the near future, that is, the next decade or so, either beginning or gaining momentum. Something that has been proposed but hasn't yet gained any momentum because everyone's focused on gay marriage. And also other issues as well that haven't gained really any momentum yet. I would say for the former, one is gun rights. Now, we've already seen this. I believe that the move towards favoring the Second Amendment is going to increase over time. See, I am opposed to the sort of scaremongering of groups like the NRA that sort of they claim to their members that we're fighting a losing battle, but we will be victorious in the end, so we need your support and your contribution, and we need you to sign this petition. Generally speaking, the Second Amendment has outperformed all expectation in the last decade. Since the failed assault rifle ban in the 90s, public opinion has swung heavily in favor of gun ownership, heavily against any sort of new regulations on firearms. The only regulation at all that has the majority support is expanding the background checks on sales of firearms. But as far as an assault weapons ban, most people no longer support the idea because they saw it already was banned before and it did nothing. Handgun bans, nobody appears to support them. Bans on like shotguns or long guns or whatever. Nobody appears to have a problem with the concept of the Second Amendment to the degree that they did before. And I would say those that are for disarmament, the sort of Feinstein crowd, they peaked in the 90s. One thing you've got to understand is that the number of supporters they have dwindled because their soft support has been eroded away as those people realize, yes, firearms are an important method of self-defense. And so you're simply left with the fanatics, and the squeaky wheel is getting the oil. That is, the small minority of the population that really does hate guns and feels uncomfortable with the Second Amendment altogether is a small minority, but they're also very vocal. So I see that. I see the fact that they are more shrill than ever actually as a dying gasp of the anti-gun crowd. Or I should say the anti-self-defense, anti-sort of defense in general crowd that wants the population to be disarmed and helpless. No, they're quite clearly losing. The number of states adopting things like Castle Doctrine, Stand Your Ground, has increased. The number of states that now issue concealed carry permits or don't even require a permit has increased. I think there are now 4 states that don't require any permitting at all. Originally, it was one. It was this state, Vermont. The liberal democratic hippie state was the only state in the 90s that didn't require any sort of permitting process for concealed carry, specifically because it's a hunting state, it's a rural state, it's a low crime state, and nobody cared. Now I believe Oklahoma. Oklahoma, I know, is one of them. I believe Colorado, and then Iowa, I think, are the other. Actually, it might be 5 now. I'm not actually sure. The charts that I've looked at only go up till 2013 or 2012. So it may be more now. The point is that things are fairly clearly swinging in the direction of deregulating the firearms that people have, specifically because it's now evident that that's a good idea. It has reduced the overall crime rate in this country as gun ownership has increased. It has declined the violent crime rate dramatically, more so than any amount of extra police, more so than any sort of government crackdown could ever do. It has decreased. That despite the fact that the economy downturned and yet crime continued to fall. That's almost unheard of. Usually you're going to have a spike in crime as people become criminals because they have no other way to actually get by. That has not happened. I think that's actually a very good thing to see for this country. I think that's a positive thing that we've seen in the last half decade. Another big struggle that I can see coming up, and I'm going to have to explain this one in depth, is polygamy, or specifically the idea of plural marriage. Now, I am probably, again, like with gay marriage, which I supported early on, I am probably in a very small minority now, but will eventually be in the majority when I say I do not oppose polygamy. I do not oppose the idea of plural marriage. That being said, I think that the Christians who have actually physically mentioned polygamy as well, slippery slope, gay marriage leads to polygamy, are one part rational and one part irrational. It's an assumption that makes sense on its face. It's irrational in the sense that there's no reason to believe that gay marriage becoming legal would directly lead to any sort of push for polygamous marriage in this country. So that would be irrational. But it is rational to assume that when that push comes, it could be used as a precedent. But the thing is, that cat's already out of the bag, because you've also got a similar precedent for the end on bans regarding interracial marriages directly informing some of the steps that are being taken now. I think most people looking back would no longer support the idea that interracial marriage should be banned, even if they themselves are uncomfortable with the idea. They don't believe in banning it outright. Sort of somebody who's on the fence about the issue anyway might still not really have a problem with others doing it, which is, again, a positive thing. If a person can be tolerant towards views they themselves disagree with, that generally shows a mark of good character rather than bad character. But yes, polygamy or plural marriage in a general sense, I believe, will be one of the next big issues. Prefaced only partially on the gay marriage debate. It will be more prefaced on it'll have the same facets of the arguments that are being made now, and down the road I believe it will become legal, specifically because the state contract involved. Like with gay marriage or like with interracial marriage, the only front that its opponents are going to actually be able to put up against it is tradition. Well, marriage is traditionally between two partners. It's not traditionally between multiple partners, and that's exactly what they'll say. Oddly, with plural marriage, you may see a subset of even the die-hard right-wing Christians initially supporting it. You may see some Christian groups not opposing it at all, like they've opposed gay marriage. Even groups that are dead set against homosexuality, even being, not punishable by death, may jump on board and say either we don't really care about this issue or yes, we support it. You might see the Mormons come out of the woodwork to support the idea of plural marriage as well, because that's what their religion teaches, and they only gave it up so they could have a state, basically, and stop being, shot at as, a bunch of lawbreakers, which was what they were at the time when they were practicing it. Yes, I think that when people look through history and they see that fairly recently in human history, plural marriage was not only considered normal, but it was also considered normal by Christians and is even smiled upon, tolerated, and outright condoned in the Old Testament and parts of the New Testament, then I think that those same Christian groups that have pushed against gay marriage might put up less defense against the idea of plural marriage. And so, yes, I think that eventually, it might take 10 years, it might take 50 years, eventually it will become legal in the United States, because the same legal arguments currently being used and failing to be used properly against gay marriage, or which were formerly used against, like, we shouldn't end slavery or something, are the same arguments essentially that will be made in that future debate. So that's another big one. Another big debate I see coming up is the concept simply of surveillance, the police state in general, I guess you could assume. And I think on that as well, I think we're moving in the right direction. Right now, in D.C., there is already an attempt to block the Patriot Act from being reauthorized altogether. Rand Paul's leading the charge on that already, alongside Amash, who has been sort of his bosom buddy on these issues. And I'm going to say right now, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up Rand Paul's running mate if he gets the nomination. And that wouldn't be a bad choice. That would actually edge me in support of Rand slightly, because I like Amash more than I like Rand. But yes, I think the idea of reforming the government apparatus responsible for sort of overseeing surveillance, militarized police, some of these bureaus that are weaponized, I think we're moving in the right direction. I think public opinion has swung against the idea of mass surveillance. If not surveillance outright, like as a libertarian, I'm against a lot more aspects of the surveillance and the militarized police and the police state and all this stuff than the average person. I admit that. I would be considered more on the fringe as a libertarian on that issue. But it's clear that most people are uncomfortable with the level at which it's being conducted. Constitution aside, it's simply making people physically uncomfortable. They no longer feel like they can trust Uncle Sam, as though they had a reason to anyway. And so you have attempts at reform. You've had the same thing, by the way, and this is why I think that some of the worst aspects of the surveillance state and the police state are probably doomed within the next few years. Some people on the left have joined people on the far right. You might see a Bernie Sanders and a Rand Paul team up to take on a group like the NSA. That gives me heart. It gives me hope that we can sort of remove a lot of this sort of debris post 9/11 that we've pumped into the government in the form of surveillance and militarization of our police, sort of the NDAA, all these dubious partnerships like the TPP, stuff like PIPA and SOFA, net neutrality. You could say yes, you could say no. I'm still undecided on that as well. But certainly stuff like the NSA blanket surveillance that happens, which a federal judge already said was unconstitutional some months ago, yet they're still doing it because the decision was sort of stayed. I think it's going to be tackled. I think that's probably the most. I think after the gay marriage thing sort of winds down here this summer, one way or the other, I think that's the next big push that you're going to see. And then of course polygamy and gun rights and all these other things probably somewhat later on or over time. You've got to realize there's also a difference between something that happens all at once and something that may take decades and decades, like the civil rights movement. It didn't happen all at once. Gay marriage has not happened all at once, and this is relatively quick compared to some of the past debates that have actually hit the Supreme Court. Or that have gone to the level of total national consciousness being an all-engulfing issue on which everyone has an opinion. Over time, a lot of those issues have taken a relatively longer period of time to actually fix, like segregation or something like that, or race relations in general, as opposed to something like gay marriage, which has actually gone relatively quickly, I think, all things considered. There are other issues as well. Another big one is global warming. I should say environmentalism, but I mean we have become a nation of environmentalists. Conservation in the strictest sense was undertaken by the Republicans beginning a century ago under people like Teddy Roosevelt. It's not exactly new or engineered by hippies or communists or anything like that. It's not a left-wing goal. The idea that we want clean air and clean water and good agricultural soil that isn't filled with heavy metals, the fact that we want generally to be in a healthy environment, one in which there is greenery, that is an issue on which I think the vast majority of Americans agree. As for some of these peripheral issues like global warming, the jury again is still out. Now both sides engage over global warming in the most hostile rhetoric that you can possibly imagine. The right wing says it's some sort of vast scientific conspiracy to try to deny us Christianity or to try to get us to cope with less, or it's some sort of takeover endeavor. They're trying to take over the world or spray us with chemtrails. The left wing says, well, these lunatic right wingers want to ignore it until the world ends and we're all going to die as the world's average temperature rises to 150 degrees centigrade, and pretty soon our skin will be melting off our bones and will revert into a subterranean mole race. You have the most strange claims being made by both groups, and yet you still do not, in my opinion, have settled science on it. Because looking again at those warming trends, I am not seeing the spike that was predicted, but I am seeing a rise in temperatures, so I choose to distance myself from the argument. As far as environmentalism goes, I'm all set in my views. Yes, I believe in conservationism. I believe in reducing and preferably eliminating pollution. I do believe in green energy. I think it's the energy of the future, and that's the next thing I'll mention. As far as global warming goes, this debate will be prefaced somewhat on the next decade or two of temperature observations. And it will depend on sort of who is in politics, who has the bully pulpit at any time, who gets involved, who speaks, what they say. That is all going to determine public discourse on something like global warming. I think that both sides have legitimate arguments to make. Ultimately, it boils down to the things that they say are so kooky and the way they say it so mean often that it turns off large sections of the population from even wanting to address it unless they're just gathering behind one of their figureheads to bash one another. And then the final thing, as I said, is green energy. I believe that in the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to see an absolute energy overhaul in the Western world. I think it's going to come on once it begins coming on very quickly, it's going to be so fast it's going to make your head spin. That is, you are going to see the rapid, fundamental transformation of the entire fueling system of the Western world. I believe it will rely heavily on solar. I think Tesla's ideas regarding the idea of a battery that can store enough charge and work efficiently enough to actually be used on a home, to detach it entirely from the power grid safely, I think could be if this works, if it is made to work and it is made inexpensive enough for the average person to use it, it will become revolutionizing. It will be used in basically every new home. It'll be retrofitted onto any home that can possibly afford it. Everybody will jump on board. Demand for solar will go through the roof. If you're an investor right now and you're not investing in solar firms that show any promise at all, you're missing out on a golden opportunity, because those are going to become the oil companies of the future. Once the cells are all installed, they may not be manufacturing as many, but remember, they've got to repair all the ones that are damaged, and they got to replace the ones that can't be made to work again. So there would be continuous demand, but as far as where we're getting our energy from, efficiency has increased, price has decreased, and the attention it is given by the public has increased dramatically as well. The fact that you are now paying half as much for twice as much power when you're installing solar as opposed to a decade ago means that the trend is going in the right direction, as opposed to other fuel sources that can't really become any more efficient than they already are, and they're polluting, like coal. Coal has been completely decimated. Coal is not going to be a major energy source in another 20 years. It will still be used. Yes, they will still mine coal. It'll be highly priced and it'll be used for pet projects. It'll be used for novelty purposes. Or it'll be used for some sort of chemical works or something like that. It will not be a major energy source by all but but the poorest nations. Only poor nations will be importing coal if they're still able to afford it, because they'll be extracting it and then having to ship it across the ocean. Oil will hold on by a thread, if only because it's more useful for automobiles for some time. But ultimately, oil is going to be decimated too. Natural gas will outlast both of them, but even then, fracking, which is making it affordable in the first place, is so controversial that you might as well look at fracking. You may look at the fracking boom here in the United States, which has made us the largest fuel producer in the world now for oil and natural gas. Look at it not as a long-term solution, but as a stopgap measure while we're building up our infrastructure with regards to green energy. I see that as the direction our country is going, and I think it is good it is very good. I know some people ripped Obama apart for this. People on the left ripped him apart. He was right to ultimately, after Solyndra failed, he was right to step back and not really vocalize on the issue so much anymore and to sort of leave it alone. The free market took care of it. The free market of experimentation upon solar technology has boosted the efficiency of solar technology substantially. It has substantially reduced the cost. It has substantially improved the number of households using solar energy. And with ultimately, the government should get out of it altogether and incentivize it further by not requiring any sort of permits beyond, yes, this person's licensed to actually install solar panels and we presume knows what he or she is doing. Right now, you pay $2,500, $3,000 just on installation costs, just regarding the permits that you have to have in order to put those things up. And that's only that you have to have the capital to put the system up to get the rebate to cover the permit that you just got. And that's basically all it covers. They shouldn't do that. They should simply do away with the permitting and let people have the rebate to cheapen the cost of the solar that they've put in rather than have to pay the permitting process off. That would be a much better idea. But those are the big things that I think are the next big struggles within our economy, our legal system, our society at large. You're going to have a move towards green energy. Not because the government wills it and says, well, the sky is falling, we're getting too warm, we need to reduce our emissions. Not because of that. That has stopped affecting people largely when they look at the temperature trend lines and they don't see the panic that they were promised. Instead, the free market essentially has picked up the slack. As people realize, yeah, this is essentially free energy in the future. It would be stupid, it would be absolutely asinine not to eventually use that as a power source, especially with batteries becoming efficient enough to actually power a home now. You couldn't do that before. You have a line of car batteries powering your home or something. Literally, you've got like your old hot rod in the garage and you're ripping the battery out of it to install in your home. It overheats and burns your roof off because you had a solar panel. Well, that's not the way things work anymore. And the gun rights issue, I believe, is moving in a positive direction. People largely now understand the Second Amendment is a good thing. They realize it allows them to defend themselves against criminals because, by the way, the cops take 15 minutes to arrive when you call them sometimes. They've realized that self-defense is important. And yes, I can see a time in the future. This will be unpopular to say, but eventually the debate will come up and go before the same Supreme Court that's talking about gay marriage now. And they will consider plural marriage. It will happen. Back when interracial marriage was settled, there was no debate over gay marriage. Nobody thought it could ever possibly happen. They knew homosexuality existed, but the idea that two gay men or two lesbian women would get married was unheard of. Nobody would have dared bring such a case. They would have been hung in a tree. But now you see the case going forward. I believe that the same will happen with plural marriage ultimately. In the end, that will be a debate that is had. I choose to believe, that it will go in the direction of allowance of plural marriage. I think it will basically follow the same timetable and the same play-by-play guide, really, that gay marriage has followed. Some fringe state will say, yes, we don't have a problem with it. Other states will react, they'll begin banning it. Bans will get overturned, and eventually all bans will be overturned. It'll be play-by-play, almost exactly the same. And it will probably, let's face it, start in a state like Vermont. Or Utah. Utah would be the best bet for this one. But it might start in some fringe hippie state like right here in Vermont where people simply say, we don't care. We don't care if you have a plural marriage. Who gives a fuck? And they'll say, well, we're now issuing marriages to plural partnerships. Yeah, neighbor about to have a car accident, I hope. Hope they would get wrapped around a tree. They're idiots, so it's okay to wish bad upon them. Yes, I believe that these are some of the major issues that are going to come up in the next few decades. I think they may start off small, but when you're dismissive of one of these really small movements, what you're going to look like is the sort of people who told me gay marriage would never spread out of New England, essentially. They said, well, Massachusetts and Vermont, that's only 2 states. It'll never go national because we're a nation of religious Christians. We would never tolerate such a thing. Well, who has the last laugh now, 10 years later? Now that it's legal in 37 states, it's probably about to become legal in all of the states. Who has the last laugh? You don't need that much foresight to see these things coming. Yeah, plural marriage is one of these things. I think the allowance of nationwide castle doctrine, stand your ground, concealed and open carry without permit, allowance of assault rifles, no limit on magazines, I think are all things that will happen in the future. It will take time. It may take 100 years, but it will happen, barring some paradigm shift in the culture as the result of some specific individual within politics that says a specific thing at just the right time, or barring a massive paradigm shift as the result of, a terrorist attack or mass protest or something else, or some major social discovery. Those are the things that I see for the future of the nation. I think it's green energy. I think it's allowance of more types of firearms in more hands. I do believe that marriage equality will spread to other issues that are associated but not directly with gay marriage. At least the idea that there's a struggle and a legal challenge involved will spread. Not that they're commensurate issues, although they will be treated as such down the line. I may be an old man before plural marriage gains any steam at all, but when it happens, I'll sit back and I'll say, "Oh, told you so," and I don't care. I honestly don't give a fuck. So there's a few of the social issues, well, not just social, but a few of the issues that I believe will come up in the next few decades. So we can serve as a prediction here, and then come 2025 or 2035 or something like that, if YouTube still exists, somebody can go back and see this and tell me if I was right or not. That's about all. Peace out.